This momentum that's been powering the Kamala Harris campaign is becoming quite concrete tonight. What began with Biden's endorsement of Harris and then became that deluge of backing from every top Democratic Party leader and led to a winning margin among the Democratic Convention delegates pledging to back Harris is now getting official. Now, this is the final, sometimes pro forma step where you have the delegates vote to make a candidate the party's nominee. It normally goes like this.
On behalf of the Governor Lolo Matalassi Molinga.
Madam Secretary, Illinois is happy to cast 164 votes for the next president, Jimmy Carter.
I move that Hillary Clinton be selected as the nominee of the Democratic Party for President of the United States.
All in favor of the motion to suspend the rules and nominate by acclamation Barack Obama as the Democratic Party's presidential candidate, please say aye.
Aye. That's the delegate roll call vote. That's what it usually looks like. Now, Democrats had already been planning to early up this tradition. Even when Biden was still in the race, they were moving the delegate vote to before any of these typical convention scenes play out in person. And just as many voters have shifted to voting early by mail, rather than waiting for the actual election day, the party was prepping this plan for the delegates to vote early by electronic ballots a couple weeks before Chicago with an online roll call. And that is now expected to conclude Monday. So this is happening. Democrats are united. They are quickly formalizing the party's choice. It also ensures a smooth start to the convention, where many Americans may see Kamala Harris speak really in an extended format for the first time this year or in years. Most people aren't glued to every other time that people talk in government. The acceptance speech marks a pretty steady ascent for her. Back at the 2008 convention, Harris had not yet won any statewide office when Obama was surging. She was not on the main stage with him. She did speak, however, at a small gathering of an Obama group that year, Vote Hope. There were no official news crews sent to cover it, but we did unearth cell phone video of her remarks in 2008 as she tied her parents' civil rights work to Obama's path.
I grew up as a child of two parents who met when they were graduate students at Berkeley and were actively involved in the civil rights movement. And so, they were marching all the time, and I was marching in a stroller. Barack has said it so well, feeling the audacity of hope. We recognized the importance of diversity. We recognized the importance of making sure that the voiceless among us had a voice in government. And what we did is what my parents did in the civil rights movement, which is we put together a coalition.
And Harris worked on her own coalition. She went on to run for Attorney General next cycle after Obama's first presidential victory. And by the time Obama was running for re-election, Democrats tapped her for a big main stage speech. We did have cameras there, of course, at the 2012 DNC.
The American dream belongs to all of us. And if we can work together and stand together and vote together on November 6th for President Barack Obama, that's a dream we will put within reach of all our people. Thank you.
The dream goes on. Harris now trying to make history like Obama and finding excitement from the musicians and culture we've been covering to the record-breaking Zooms of all types of different groups of people kind of coming together quickly for Harris. The nation certainly seems interested. The Hollywood outlet Variety breaking this pop culture scoop. Maya Rudolph will return to SNL to play Harris for the next 3 months.
The fun is back, baby. America's fun ant. I'm not going to worry about the polling numbers. I'm just going to have fun and see if I can get some viral moments. Mama needs a GIF. Gonna tell my kids this was Michelle Obama.
And, well, sometimes the jokes become true because the viral moments and GIFs have been coming. More people and young people clearly interested in politics right now. And that can change things. It could put more states in play. Politico reporting today Republicans' confidence in Trump is slipping, and they're even buying ads in North Carolina, a state that went blue only once in the past 40 years for Obama's reelection bid there. And it's hard to be a first at anything. I think most people recognize that. But being a first can also be historic and inspiring. In politics, it can be energizing. Harris is, by the way, the only second black woman ever elected to the Senate, following Carol Moseley Braun, who actually reflected on Harris's path just this week with us.
We all have to show up and be there for her and take advantage, not let this enthusiasm dwindle, which people have short memories sometimes. But if we can keep the drumbeat going, we can have our first woman president.
And if America does have that, it would be not only a first, as the senator said, it would be a rarity. The U.S. has never had a black female governor across all 50 states. So the White House ceiling would actually be smashed before any of the governor's mansions in this category. Some big cities have smashed the ceiling, from D.C. to Atlanta. Others haven't. Take the progressive mecca of Manhattan, which has twice broken the color barrier and recently saw the election of its current mayor, Eric Adams, plus a diverse slate of options. The civil rights leader, lawyer, and former counsel to Mayor de Blasio, Maya Wiley, a black woman candidate, finished second among those 5 primary candidates.
Ours is a fight for the future. And ours is a fight for freedom. Across our nation, we are witnessing a full-on assault on hard-fought, hard-won freedoms and rights.
Kamala Harris speaking there as we chart her rise. We're joined by Maya Wiley, who, as I mentioned, came in second, running for the mayor of New York City. She's also a former civil prosecutor, leader of the Leadership Conference on Civil and Human Rights, and we should mention a New York DNC delegate. Welcome.
Thank you, Ari.
What do you see in Harris's rise there as she sort of reintroduces herself to parts of the country?
Okay, so many things, and it's hard not to be emotional about it. You know, what I see as a leader, someone who's a very experienced leader, but who, for many people, many of us who've been following her career knew, but for many people didn't really realize just how exciting she is. You know, she came out immediately very loyal to Joe Biden, to her president as a vice president, even in the swirl of what was going to happen to the future of the party in this election cycle. She stayed loyal, but as soon as he came out, made his decision and announced her, you saw Kamala Harris. You know, what I made of that, and what we know, those of us who've had the privilege of seeking public office and asking for people's trust, is that they want to know you. They want to know who you are. They don't want to get a presentation of something they think you want. You know, and she just came out as her full self. She came out, that speech, you showed that clip of her before anyone knew who she was, because she hadn't run for public office. You heard her talk about her civil rights history. You heard a civil rights lawyer there, as well as someone who is deeply concerned about the future of the country, but also who demonstrated it with such power. You know, I think she came out powerfully, and I think people felt it.
What do you see as someone who not only has a lived experience of being a black woman in America, black woman in American law and politics, which is one layer, but then going into something most people don't experience at all, which is you ran, as mentioned, New York, major media market, the tabloids, the TV, as a black woman candidate, and we showed that no states ever picked one for governor. Only 2 states have done it for senator. What do you see here? What comes to mind for your own life experience?
Well, first of all, the very fact that there's any discussion about what her racial identity is, and the fact that that is being weaponized in an election cycle, is exactly what we experience. Because it is not just offensive, and it is. It's also an effort to code to whether or not you should relate to the candidate. At the same time, we heard aggressive attacks on her qualifications. Someone who's been a district attorney, elected, first woman district attorney, someone who was elected to a statewide office of the most populous state in the country, someone who's been in the U.S. Senate, someone who is in the White House and has been in the administration for 3.5 years with a portfolio, one you just discussed in your first segment. This is what we're debating as qualified? Well, that's just an example of what we have to deal with as black women, as women of color, as women of any race, whenever we stand up and say, I can do this. And I want to earn your trust. And instead of having an actual honest discussion about, okay, what will you do? Tell us what you'll do. Instead, it becomes personal attacks on the person rather than an honest discussion about the candidate.
Sheila Jackson Lee was a change maker. She worked with all her heart to lift up the people of her city, of her state, and of our nation. And to honor her memory, let us continue to fight to realize the promise of America, a promise of freedom, opportunity, and justice, not just for some, but for all.
Vice President Kamala Harris earlier today eulogizing the late Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, talking about the trail she blazed in politics, promising to continue Sheila Jackson Lee's legacy. Now, this comes as Harris continues to make history with her run for the presidency. Today, the DNC began the process of nominating her as the first black female nominee for president with a virtual roll call. But as Harris continues to energize voters and break barriers, she's also faced attacks from racists seeking to undermine her candidacy, including from the former president of the United States, Donald Trump. Yesterday, Trump lashed out, questioning her racial heritage, saying that she was Indian, but, quote, then all of a sudden she made a turn and she became a black person, an attack that he continued today. For the record, Vice President Kamala Harris is black and Indian. Donald Trump may not know it, but it's actually possible to be both. Vice President Harris last night responded to Donald Trump once again, proving himself to be one of the most predictable bigots in professional politics. Listen to what she said.
It was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better. The American people deserve better. The American people deserve a leader who tells the truth, a leader who does not respond with hostility and anger when confronted with the facts. We deserve a leader who understands that our differences do not divide us. They are an essential source of our strength.
Joining the conversation with me at the table, New York Times editorial board member and MSNBC political analyst Mara Gay, and Democratic strategist and professor at Columbia University, MSNBC political analyst Basil Smikle. Welcome to both of you. Thank you for being here. Now that we're over the shock of what happened yesterday, because it was shocking even though you expected what was going to happen, what do you make of it? Mara, what was going on there? What was Donald Trump's goal and intent when he sat down at the NABJ?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I surely believe that he went with the intention of showing himself and his hardest core right-wing supporters that he is fully ready to put black people in their place, particularly black women. You know, I think as weird as this was to some people, it's not weird to me, it's familiar. Right. I think for a lot of black Americans, the experience of somebody saying to you, a white person saying to you, oh, you think you can be fully American? You think you deserve this job? You're just a DEI hire. You don't belong here. Uppity, whatever you want to kind of go there with. So that's really what this was about. I also believe that it was an attempt to change the conversation, which had been largely focused on Kamala Harris's electrification, if you will, of the Democratic Party. And I think that he personally needed a serotonin rush, and that this is his comfort. This is where he's comfortable. This is his red meat. It's also all he has to offer the American people, and it's a reminder that it's the same old divisive playbook. Right. Hateful, dividing America. I don't believe it's what most Americans want to see or where they want to go. And I also just have to say that the performative nature of what we saw yesterday is really important.
Right. If you didn't watch it and you heard the words, you'd say, well, that's strange that he talked about Kamala Harris being Indian and black. But when you watched how he did it, it was a different experience.
Yeah, this was an attempt also to say, you know, him calling the VP not black or someone who just turned black. Right. That's really an attempt to say, in a country where white men have largely historically defined who is black, who is white, who's anything they want them to be. Right. It's an attempt to say, you don't get to define who you are. Yeah. Vice President Harris. Yeah. I get to say who you are. You think you can be president? You think you can be a black woman and be a journalist? You're nothing. That's what that was.
All three of us sitting at the table would have backgrounds that Donald Trump would find challenging to describe because apparently you're just supposed to have one box that you check. You yourself are not in one box. You'd find yourself, if Donald Trump were at this table, he'd also probably tell you something.
As a child of Jamaican immigrants, I think and Tamar's point, it's a great point because he has this history of othering people, right? You don't fit in very cleanly into this box that I am creating for you to be able to check off, right? And I've said yesterday, he wants to be the arbiter of blackness. He wants to be the arbiter of what is racially acceptable versus not. We've seen this before. He did this with Barack Obama. He created birtherism, right? But as an attempt to other him and diminish him. He's not, he's too uppity. He's this, and he won't exactly use those words, but what he was trying to do, and the performative is a great way to explain what happened yesterday, because what he's saying is, I know you better than you know yourselves. And I'm going to dictate how you need to fall in line so that you could be more acceptable to this larger audience. And if you don't think that has policy trails, look at Florida. Look at the attempts to try to change K-12 curriculum, trying to say that, no, we're going to change the language of your AP African American Studies exam to make it sort of streamlined to this, and acceptable and adhere to this kind of rubric. And think about the bill that they tried to pass that was scheduled to take money away from college-based organizations like mine, Alpha and AK, who's that Vice President Kamala Harris is a member of, to try to keep them from doing the civic engagement that they do. It's an attempt to create this singular narrative for America.
Right. The process to officially nominate Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's presidential nominee is now underway. It will go on, we expect, for several days. Today, Vice President Harris will deliver the eulogy for Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who was, of course, a powerful advocate for women and minorities. And it comes as Harris is hitting back against Donald Trump after he questioned her racial identity during that discussion at a black journalists conference during this hour yesterday.
And it was the same old show. The divisiveness and the disrespect. And let me just say, the American people deserve better. The American people deserve better.
She's responding to Trump saying she somehow turned black, and he's doubling down today. He posted this picture on Truth Social, writing, "Thank you, Kamala, for the nice picture you sent from many years ago. Your warmth, friendship, and love of your Indian heritage are very much appreciated." Joining us now, Matthew Brown, national race and politics reporter for the Associated Press. Matthew Dowd is chief strategist for the Bush-Cheney 2004 presidential campaign and a senior MSNBC political contributor and analyst. So, Matthew Brown, I guess you've had 24 hours to process the remarks that you heard, the questions and answers you heard yesterday, because you were there as a reporter, but also as a black man who has dealt, I'm sure, your entire life with racial issues. Give us your perspective on what you saw and felt yesterday at the NABJ conference and what you think it means for this campaign.
Absolutely, Chris. So this was a really remarkable series of comments by former President Trump. I think it's very important to note that his comments questioning Harris's identity came within the first 5 minutes of the interview and were actually unsolicited, which indicates in some ways that this had been on his mind. He'd been thinking about it. And I think that that's a very striking fact, just given that over this last week or so, we've been seeing Kamala Harris really come into the fore here. As you said, she's going to be soon officially nominated as the Democrats' nominee for president here. And all of that shows that she's been dominating the news cycle and has been front and center for several weeks at this point. And Trump may have in some ways felt that he was not on his back foot and not part of the narrative. So this was definitely a way for him to grab attention again, which when I talked to other NABJ members here is overwhelmingly what folks were saying, that they weren't necessarily surprised, even though Trump's many comments were definitely shocking in the moment.
Yeah, I think I heard that a lot from folks, Matthew Dowd, that there was nothing really surprising here. And yet somehow, I don't know, maybe because it was compressed into 34 minutes, it was shocking. And then I also want to say that this afternoon, NBC News talked to J.D. Vance about this. They asked him about Trump's racial comments and if he believes that Kamala Harris is black. Here's what J.D. Vance said.
Kamala Harris is a chameleon. She says that she's a prosecutor, but she doesn't enforce the border law. She says that she's tough on crime, but she wants to defund the police. And she says one thing in front of one audience and another thing in front of another audience. I mean, we just saw her in Georgia a couple of days ago, a person who spent a lot of her life in Canada putting on a Southern accent in front of Georgia. Trump's point is that she is a chameleon. She presents a different face depending on the audience she speaks to.
Shocking things, sometimes racist things. Matthew Dowd, as you know, a lot of people, when you ask them about it, it's baked in. Or they'll say, you know, I know Donald Trump is like that, but is this different, do you think, in any way? And what do you think about what we've heard over the last 24 hours?
Well, first, I've been in politics for 40 years, and I'm not always surprised by levels of hypocrisy. But what J.D. Vance just said is just reaches a height of hypocrisy. He talks about Vice President Harris as regards her race being a chameleon, like you can somehow change your race just by virtue of what you think about, and then you change your own raceness. But this is a guy who's changed his own name 3 different times. This is a guy who's now on the ticket with Donald Trump, who called Donald Trump Hitler in the course of this and had other disparaging things. And now he's serving Donald Trump on the ticket with him. So that to me is just the height of hypocrisy. What I find striking in this, and I don't know what's worse, what he said about Vice President Harris, which is awful and one of the most racially divisive things that somebody running for president has said since George Wallace. This really is, Donald Trump really is our version, the 21st century version of George Wallace, and how he talks and how he looks at the world in the course of this. I don't know if it's worse what he said or how he treated the journalists who were on that stage, which, as you know, Chris, he's called journalists and people in the news media enemy of the people. And it's so striking to me on a day where President Biden and Vice President Harris secured journalists from captivity in Russia, held in captivity in Russia. Today, he sits there and treats journalists who are just trying to ask the questions, who are just repeating his own words back to him in such a disrespectful manner. So to me, it's a combination of all those things. And I just don't get what he thinks he gets by this. I guess he feeds his base, which likes some of this to a degree. But I actually think it makes him look like such a weak and petty person.
I wonder what the conversations were, Matthew Brown, that you've had with folks there, members of NABJ, and the comments that I heard from friends, from colleagues, things that I saw, for example, when I was on the campaign trail or the brief period after the Obama White House where I covered the Trump White House, about the way Donald Trump speaks to women reporters, but particularly women of color, and what conversations you're hearing where you are today.
Yes, Chris. So here at the conference, a lot of people have pointed out that all throughout Trump's presidency, the National Association of Black Journalists itself actually called out Trump multiple times for what they saw as derogatory comments against specifically black women journalists. And that had been occurring not just in 2017, but was repeated again in 2018 with an official statement from the association, and then was followed up again in 2020 when he actually targeted Washington correspondent for NBC News, Yamiche Alcindor. So this has been something that he has done multiple times throughout his presidency and as he was first campaigning in 2015. And a lot of people are bringing up that history as well. I should also note that one conversation that I've been hearing from a lot of folks, not just here at the conference, but actually in my reporting all through Georgia and just through the battleground states, is a lot of Indian American and South Asian communities somewhat expressing disbelief at the turn of the conversation here. Essentially that someone like J.D. Vance, who is in a multiracial, multicultural family, would question the idea of being able to, code switches, we would say, or to live in multiple cultures and to identify and to speak to multiple cultures. That's something that I've especially heard has been shocking and perplexing to a lot of people in the communities to which we're discussing.
So, Matthew Dowd, I only have a minute left, but what does this portend for the next 96 days of this campaign?
Awfulness. I think as Matthew Brown pointed out, I think Donald Trump felt on a back foot because not only was Vice President Harris getting more publicity and more energy than him, J.D. Vance was getting more attention than him. And so I think he's just going to keep ratcheting this up, and it's going to get more and more outrageous. And I think the vice president handled it perfectly yesterday, which she didn't defend herself personally. She didn't wade into his personal attack. She basically stood up and said, this is not who we are as Americans. And this is Donald Trump. He's trying to divide us again. And we can't let him do it. So smart move by the vice president's part. But I think Donald Trump, it's only going to get worse and worse as he gets more and more desperate.
Yeah, for a campaign that's only been operational for, less than a couple of weeks, it's clear what their strategy is. Matthews, Brown, and Dowd, thank you, gentlemen.
I want to bring in Kadia Goba, political reporter for Semafor, and who was on the panel interviewing former President Trump yesterday. Also with us, MSNBC political analyst and former Democratic representative from Maryland, Donna Edwards, and former GOP strategist and co-founder of the Lincoln Project, Rick Wilson. Kadia, I want to start with you since you were on that panel yesterday. These comments, really nothing new for Donald Trump, as he was the chief propagator of President Obama's birther conspiracy theories. That's really what launched his own political career. But did anything you heard surprise you?
Yeah, I hadn't heard this whole Kamala Harris isn't black thing before. So that was actually surprising. And as the news or as the day went on, I understood that this seems to be a new attack line, positioning her as this person who flip-flops on things. However, it kind of initiated with her flip-flopping on her identity, however misleading and false that is, and her educational background. But yeah, it was a little surprising, a little stark, especially in a room of many, many black journalists and on stage with 3 black journalists interviewing the former president.
Congresswoman, what went through your mind when you heard these comments?
Well, it was staggering, actually. I mean, I think that Donald Trump continues to struggle with the way it is that he is going to run with Kamala Harris as an opponent. But it really showed his lack about the way America is. I mean, he's never, I guess, heard the term biracial before. I think, Kamala Harris identifies as both an Indian woman and a black woman. She went to a historically black college and university, Howard University. And so I just think that Donald Trump continues to dig himself into a hole when it comes to challenging Kamala Harris. And frankly, he seems quite out of step with the rest of America.
And Rick, the Trump campaign, however, is not trying to backpedal. In fact, they appear to be leaning all the way into these comments. In fact, Donald Trump's still putting out social media posts today, essentially echoing what he said in those remarks about Kamala Harris turning black more recently. How do you explain that? Is this part of his strategy?
There's no real strategy underneath this. There's a great division in the campaign right now. The professionals like Susie Wiles and Chris LaCivita want Donald Trump to please, please, please shut the hell up. They understand that this drives voters away. They understand it's political poison. They understand that Donald Trump cannot be controlled, however. He does not know how to run against Vice President Harris. He does not have a strategy or a plan. This is Donald Trump's lizard brain telling him what to do. And he's trapped in the feedback loop with his audience who do want the racial hatred, who do want the owning the libs act, the act that he was trying to do. They do want the ugliness and the nasty remarks and the ugly comments. That's something they've been programmed to get from him, and they give him feedback on it, and he keeps doing it. It's a very powerful drug for him. And I want to also make one more comment. The idea of somebody being biracial in this country is as natural as anything now. This is not 1950 or 1850, Donald. But, Donald Trump is a guy who isn't one, but identifies as a billionaire. He isn't one, but he identifies as a strong leader. I mean, it's an absurdity that he thinks that someone can't define who they are from both sides of their family tree.
What I don't understand, though, is why he'd be leaning into this, because if it's about political instincts, doesn't this just alienate undecided voters who maybe were, turned off by these types of comments in 2016 and 2020?
They're terrible instincts, and he's always gotten away with a lot of this in the past. But right now he is facing a formidable candidate who is connecting with America at a level that he no longer is able to achieve. And it's making him insane. It's driving him completely out of his mind. And as every day passes, he's going to get worse and worse. No one should expect the new tone or a better Donald Trump. There is no better Donald Trump.
Kadia, how do you think race will be a part of this 2024 campaign going forward?
I didn't expect this, but it seems to be ramping up. As you mentioned, Donald Trump is playing into this, and now we see people like Marjorie Taylor Greene also throwing her hand in the, also tweeting out things that are, race-based. And as you mentioned before, the party's sort of split on this. I do think that Democrats will actually not do this or kind of stay away and pivot towards whatever underlying issue they say, they'll probably say Republicans are, unable to, talk about anything else because they have no policies. I think they'll stay away from that and let Republicans just run with this, sadly, to the detriment of their own party, because as you mentioned, this might be great fodder for the base. It is not going to be good for independents or people on the fence of whether or not they'll vote for Trump over Kamala Harris.
Rick, let's talk about the Veep stakes, because we're expecting Vice President Harris to announce her VP pick any day now. Her campaign's already talked about events scheduled with her running mate next week. With those independent voters, with those people who are on the fence or are undecided right now about what they're going to do for this election, who do you think would best broaden Harris's support?
Look, I think you've got an embarrassment of riches right now for Vice President Harris to choose from, to choose her vice president, to choose her running mate. You've got people who have been tremendously effective. Mark Kelly in the Senate on border issues, on national security issues. You've got Josh Shapiro, one of the best governors in the country, who has made the commitment as a governor not to play politics with it, but to go in and build roads and bridges, do the things that people need to have done. You've got Waltz, who could be a tremendous forward-facing person. He's a great communicator. You have a lot of great people that are on the list and that may not be publicly on the list, all of whom are able to go out there and post up not only to show that they could be a part of an effective Harris administration, but also as a counterpoint to the single worst vice presidential candidate of all time, including Sarah Palin and Dan Quayle, in the form of J.D. Vance. I think any of those folks that are being discussed right now could take J.D. Vance to the woodshed politically when it comes down to a head-to-head comparison or in a debate. So I think she's got a lot of great choices ahead, and I think any one of them is going to show a superior connection to Americans than J.D. Vance, who has spent the first 10 days of his role as a vice presidential candidate alienating women, cat owners, and every other form of American he can find to insult.
Chicago, of course, the setting of the National Association for Black Journalists convention. And there was another tense moment there yesterday when former President Trump was asked about his running mate, J.D. Vance's comments about childless women.
He said the Democrats running the country are a bunch of childless cat ladies who are miserable at their own lives and the choices they've made. And so they want to make the rest of the country miserable too. He's not talking here about how great it is to be a parent. He's attacking what he says are the choices people are making to not have children. Did you know that he had these views about people who do not have children before you picked him to be your running mate? And do you agree with him?
No, I know this. He is very family oriented, and he thinks family is a great thing. That doesn't mean he thinks that if you don't have a family, it's not. I know people with families. I know people with great families. I know people with very troubled families. And I also know people with no families. They didn't meet the right person. Things happen. You go through life, you don't meet the right person.
But he's not just talking about families here. He also says that people that don't have children should get less votes than those that do.
I'm just speaking for myself.
Is that your campaign
I think
position?
I'm speaking for him, too. He strongly believes in family. But I know people with great families. I know people with not great families that don't have a family. And the people without the family are far better. They're superior in many cases, okay?
Just minutes later, Trump then seemed to downplay the significance of his vice presidential pick.
I've always had great respect for him and for the other candidates, too. But I will say this. and I think this is well documented, historically, the vice president, in terms of the election, does not have any impact. I mean, virtually no impact. You have 2 or 3 days where there's a lot of commotion as to who, like you're having it on the Democrat side, who it's going to be. And then that dies down, and it's all about the presidential pick. Virtually never has it mattered. Maybe Lyndon Johnson mattered for different reasons than what we're talking about, not for vote reasons, but for political reasons, other political reasons. But historically, the choice of a vice president makes no difference. You're voting for the president, and you can have a vice president who's outstanding in every way, and I think JD is. I think that all of them would have been. But you're not voting that way. You're voting for the president. You're voting for me. If you like me, I'm going to win. If you don't like me, I'm not going to win.
Joining us now, the host and creative director of MSNBC Live, Luke Russert. Luke, good morning. As someone put it to me yesterday, Trump's efforts there to downplay the significance of his vice presidential pick sounds like probably what his aides have told him in recent days as he complains about the pick of J.D. Vance and all the bad headlines he's created where he's trying to say, no, boss, it doesn't matter. It's all about you, not about him. But clearly, Trump and his team on the defensive about this Vance pick, and it comes as Vice President Harris is about to select her own running mate.
Yeah, well, I don't think I've seen a less ringing endorsement of a vice presidential pick in recent modern presidential history, essentially saying, yeah, don't worry about him. I'm the guy on the ballot. That doesn't say like there's a lot of confidence that Donald Trump necessarily has in J.D. Vance. Look, Jonathan, I think J.D. Vance has been very problematic for Donald Trump on a number of levels, but perhaps no more so than his association with this Project 2025. And the fact that Donald Trump, someone who's very chameleon-like, something they talk about Kamala Harris being, never likes to really be pinned down on something, doesn't like to talk about policy, always likes to talk about the personal. J.D. Vance is so attached to the policy about what they would actually do if they were governing. One of the big stories here in Washington, D.C., close to Virginia, a state with a lot of federal workers, Project 2025, they want to fire all these civil servants. J.D. Vance is someone who's been in favor of that, essentially saying that anyone who has a government job, is they're a, quote, unelected bureaucrat, needs to be looked at. So in theory, you're having conversations here in D.C. and other places around the country with a lot of federal workers that go, hey, I worked for the FDA under 4 presidents, bipartisan, for 20, 25 years, and suddenly I get fired on day one of the Trump administration just because. So what J.D. Vance has done to Donald Trump is tied him down to a lot of policy that he doesn't like, not to mention on the personal front, which is deeply offensive to women. I mean, one of the things I always like to do is someone who's in and out of politics over the last few years is, all right, what cuts through to people who don't inhale this stuff like you and I do? I have gotten so many messages from young women that have said, wait, did he really say that? Did J.D. Vance really say that? So, no, I mean, if the job of the vice president is to be ready on day one and to not cause the ship to take on water, I think it's been an epic failure by J.D. Vance so far.
Yeah, the number one job of a vice presidential candidate is to do no harm. J.D. Vance doing harm. Jeremy, this reminds me, actually, this moment with of Trump downplaying Vance's significance reminds me of some of the reporting you have in your book. Because when Vance was picked, there's a sense that Trump was trying to say, oh, this is the MAGA heir apparent. And that may sort of be true. But Trump doesn't really care about the Republican Party. He cares about the MAGA brand, but he doesn't care about the Republican Party. He doesn't care if it's down ballot victories. He doesn't care about setting up for future success. He just cares about himself.
That's exactly right. And it's why he denounced, I think, Project 2025 and the strong language that he did, even though there may be policy prescriptions in that are farther to the right than he is. It's not his document, right? And everything always has to be about him, originate from him. And when I was reporting my book, I was talking to one of Trump's closest advisors, Steve Bannon, who said to me, and I quote him on the record saying this, do you think Trump cares about the next Republican who runs for president? No, he wants the next Republican presidential candidate to lose by 40 points because he wants to be able to say, only I could do this, Donald J. Trump. So I think that when you're looking at Vance and any kind of potential future he has in the Republican Party, you have to remember 2 things. One, the people closest to Trump often don't last very long, and they don't have political futures because they either end up in jail or disgraced or shoved out of the inner sanctum because they've somehow offended him. And that Trump is not interested in nurturing a successor for his movement because it's his movement in his eyes.
I love the idea that there's a kind of box you can tick. Do you want to end up in jail, or do you end up disgraced, or just chucked out of the inner circle? That's what happens to so many of those people who hang around Trump for too long.